Hello. This is part 7 of the 475 part book. No, this is part 7. I think there'll be 8. I think there'll be 8 now. There might be more, but I think there'll be 8. Of my book entitled Women Should Run the Countries, Mostly Men Should Run the Economies, and 14 to 17-year-olds should have the vote. I read there was 20 total things I thought was important for any country to have these days. The big 6 were the big ones, important ones. I've read those. The next 6, the middle 6 as I call them, medium 6 as I call them, I've read those as well. And the small 8, they're last. And I'll read them now. Okay, I'm reading from this point. Well, that covers the big 6 and the medium 6. Now I will cover the small 8 to make an even 20 in total. These are laws, rules, guidelines I would like to see put in place, but they are far from a top priority to me, though others might feel differently about one or more of them. The small 8 are: every child in every school in the world is taught English, in addition to their local languages. I want everyone to eventually to be able to understand each other. Just put B8 on it. 14. Every inmate in a prison must be housed in single-person cells, funds permitting. Prisoner fraternization must be eliminated, kept to an absolute minimum. 15. Every personal transportation vehicle inside a major city must be zero emission within 10 years of this law's enactment, and every business operating inside a major city must be carbon neutral within that city within 20 years of this law's enactment. 16. Maximum political donation per person to $100 U.S. and $20 per candidate. Corporations, businesses would not be allowed to make campaign contributions. 17. Limit the maximum any person may have in any country to $10 billion in 2020 U.S. dollars. 18. All children under 14 and convicted felons must wear a locating device similar to a Fitbit smartwatch. 19. Torture and capital punishment are illegal under all circumstances. And 20. Every citizen must give me $1,000. I'm kidding. 20. Abortions are illegal after the fetus has attained sentience. 13. Every child in every school in the world is taught English in addition to their local languages. I want everyone to eventually to be able to understand each other. One of the things that separate people is language. I realize lots of people think that lots of different languages make the world more eclectic and rich. I say baloney. All it does is make a bunch of people have not a clue what most other people are saying. You want to have lots of languages? Fine, have them. But there should be one language that everyone understands so that everyone can eventually talk to each other. We saw it in Canada in their Quebec separatist movement, which came within a few thousand votes of seeing the province of Quebec leave Canada in 1995. By the way, my mother was from Quebec. I have an opinion... I have an opinion about the Quebec separatist movement. Yes, there are many other reasons that Quebec wants to leave Canada besides language. This is weirdly put. And I will deal with that now. Yes, there are many other reasons that Quebec wants to leave Canada besides language. But by miles, the number one difference between the two camps is language. Most Quebecers speak French primarily, and most Canadians do not speak French. And even now, hardcore separatists in Quebec are deliberately trying to make it harder for Quebecers to learn and or be taught in English in Quebec public schools. Plus, Quebec's childish sign laws, let me put a little comma in there, do not allow English only or any other language only signs. Even though this is blatantly against a number of basic human rights of freedom of speech and expression. You hardcore separatists are idiots and are letting your emotions run your logic on this, in my opinion. You hardcore separatists are idiots and or are letting your emotions run your logic on this, in my opinion. If I said that. For those who do not know, I think whom is better. For those whom do not know, French-speaking Canadians were kind of treated like second-class citizens for a long time. But once the separatist movement really took off politically, outside of the cowardly and disgusting FLQ terrorists of the 1960s and 1970, all that stopped. Canadians stood up and took notice and stopped treating Quebec francophones, French-speaking people, badly. And that was about 40 plus years ago. Of course, that is a very good thing. Francophones should never have been treated any better or worse than Anglophones. I'm not laughing at it, it's ridiculous to treat someone better or worse just because of the language they speak. It seems silly to me. Anyway, Francophones should never have been treated any better or worse than Anglophones, English-speaking people. But idiots are idiots, and lots of idiots like to make fun of differences instead of embracing them. The Quebec separatist movement has died down some, but it is still alive, most definitely. And the hardcore types are still acting like children with their French sign laws, which force people to put all their signs in French-dominating type. And yes, this is against Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms with free speech. But the federal governments don't have the guts to challenge these laws. Yes, they did it before and won, but the hardcore francophones just put new laws in place, so they let it go. In my opinion, if you have to force people by law to use a certain language, then the language is not worth saving. And if the only way they can get their precious separation is to force people to feel like outcasts in their country by trying to stop them using any language but French as much as they can, that is just pathetic and childish. By the way, I think, come up with a new word besides childish, I'm using that too much. Just pathetic and weak. By the way, I think French is a much more beautiful language than English. I find English is a nuts and bolts language. It gets the job done, but has not much beauty to it. Not like French or Italian or Russian or some other languages. But having typed that, language is not music. It is for communicating. It should not make any difference whatsoever which language you use. Where am I? So long as it is relatively easy to learn. Which I hear Russian is definitely not, by the way. And everyone knows it, so everyone can speak to each other. I didn't say that right. It should not make any difference whatsoever which language you use, so long as it is relatively easy to learn and everyone knows it, so everyone can speak to each other. I'll get rid of that Russian thing. I see nothing whatsoever to be gained by most people in the world having no idea what the heck most people are even saying. Nothing. And it does separate us. How many wars have been started because people of different languages and just about no other differences felt like almost different races basically just because they could not understand each other? Everyone should understand each other. That seems like well duh to me. Look, if Quebecers want to leave Canada because they think Canada sucks, fine, I get that. I'm not sure it is true, but at least I can understand that. But if the main reason they want to leave is because of their anger, bitterness due to the way they were treated 40, 50 plus years ago, that is just weak. Oh, and by the way, all this separatist talk has hurt Quebec's economy, as you can imagine. I mean, who wants to invest in a province if you have no idea which country it might be in a few years? And I can prove it. In 1951, before all the separatist talk began, Montreal was Canada's largest city. This is based on numbers I found in Wikipedia for both cities. They had 1.24 million people. I think you can find those links yourself. Oh, what the hell, I'll put them up. Just put them up. In 1951, before all the separatist talk began, Montreal was Canada's largest city. They had 1.24 million people. And Toronto, which was second in size and power, had 1.17 million people. Then the separatist stuff happened. And by the late 1960s, it had turned violent with the separatist terrorist organization, the FLQ. So, naturally, people started to leave. Between 1966 and 1986, the population of Montreal had dropped by over 200. Yet Toronto's population continually rose during that time. Today, Toronto is the economic capital of Canada, and it has, as of 2018, over 2.7 million people, whereas Montreal has just over 1.7 million people. And I guarantee you most of the reason for the huge population gap is due to the separation English alienation factors. I understand Francophones not wanting to be treated as second best. I get that totally. But that is long gone, and it is time to forgive, forget the past, and move forward. This separation stuff to me is mostly silly and hurting Quebec far more than it is helping. Plus, this desperately clinging on to French like it's your left arm or something is childish. Do you hardcore, I keep saying childish, do you hardcore Quebec Francophones realize just how ridiculous your French sign laws, with your enforcement police, sound to most of the rest of the free world? You are hurting your economy just because you are terrified that French might one day fade away. And what if it did? Outside of over-emotional ding-dongs, I want a comma there, who would rather die than give up their language, tell me how your lives would be destroyed if you woke up tomorrow and the only language the entire world, including you, could understand was English, or Mandarin, or Italian, and all written words were in that one language. Would your heart stop beating? Nope. Would your brain explode? Nope. Your life would be more or less the same. And save the language dying is a tragedy, blather. It is not a tragedy. Sad? Maybe. But a tragedy? Please. The bottom line is you would be fine. I am not saying you should forget French. What I am saying is forcing everyone by law to be French first is ridiculous. And it will probably do more harm to your cause in the long run than it will help. Think about it, please. The minute someone says French is dying, I hope people will try and keep it alive, I bet you the average person who hears this will probably think, well, that's kind of sad. Let's try and save it. But the minute you say you will use French because the government is forcing you to, I bet you most people will think, an order? Piss off. I will do what I want. You are turning French into the language of the weak, as people who embrace it in Quebec are more and more seen as weak people who just do whatever they are told, whereas those who use English, Mandarin, or whatever, in deference to what the government wants, are rebels. Which sounds cooler? The answer ain't the first one. My point is, let's just let people choose whatever language they want. If French is so wonderful, and I think it is, it will survive and thrive on its own merit, not because you literally force people to use it. Anyway, languages do not enrich if people cannot understand each other. They actually separate unless there is one common language everyone can understand. It makes zero sense to deliberately have most people in the world unable to understand each other. Zero. Again, this law would allow people to learn, use their native languages, all they want, knock themselves out, but they must teach the English language fully as opposed to tokenly. Why English? Because it is the language that more humans understand than any other. Yes, more people have Mandarin Chinese as their primary language than any other language, but English is the language understood by the most people in the world. And I'll put a link in the description on that. Why English? Because it is the language that more humans understand than any other. Yes, more people have Mandarin Chinese as their primary language than any other language, but English is the language understood by the most people in the world. Funny enough, Klingon is understood by the 25th most spoken language in the world. No, I'm totally kidding. So that is the language I choose to be the world's official language, English, not Klingon. I see everyone being able to understand each other as a no-brainer. That's 13. 14. Every inmate in a prison must be housed in single-person cells, funds permitting. Prisoner fraternization must be eliminated, kept to an absolute minimum. The idea of housing prisoners together seems an incredibly stupid one, especially if you are holding out any hope that these inmates will become rehabilitated. How the heck is a first-time criminal supposed to get rehabilitated if you surround them with nothing but hardened criminals? That is beyond ridiculous. You put a first-time criminal in with other criminals, what will you end up with? Another hardened criminal. He will just learn how to be a better criminal, like what mistakes he made the first time. He will just learn he will just learn what mistakes he made the first time and what he can do to avoid getting caught next time. It's like crime university. The only realistic hope you have to rehabilitate a criminal in jail is to not let them have anything whatsoever to do with other criminals. And the only people they should be allowed to even speak with, other than prison guards, employees, are people with no criminal records. You are trying to show these people the error of their ways, not teach them how to do their crime better the next time. As well, I think the prisoner's victims should be able to confront the persons that committed the illegal offenses against them, safely, of course. Should be able, I said that wrong. As well, I think the prisoner's victims should be able to confront the persons that committed the illegal offenses against them, safely, of course. I did that wrong. Like, every 1 to 3 months, a criminal must talk with their victim and say one friend, family member for support of the victim, not of the criminal, supervised and with glass separating them. If the victims want to. And if the victims refuse, they get a certain amount of time added to their sentence. If the victims refuse, if the criminals refuse, I don't know if I said that right or not, they get a certain amount of time added to their sentence, like 1 to 3 weeks for each sentence, each session refused. And if these sessions include a bunch of people yelling at their attacker for 36 to 60 minutes, so be it. He doesn't like it. He should have thought of that before he committed his crime. I think it is very important for the criminal to fully understand what he has done from the victim's perspective. Also, it might be good for the victim to face their attacker under safe conditions. And I also would like the prisoner to spend as much time in their cell as possible. Oh, by the way, if the victim was murdered, the victim's loved ones could go to these sessions in their place. I also would like the prisoner to spend as much time in their cell as possible. They could try and allow the prisoners to do piecework in their cells, and say 1/2 hour per day they could, by themselves, be allowed outside to exercise. As a bonus, I would imagine a prison like this would require far less guards to keep the prisoners safe, and thus save quite a bit of money over present jails in general. I do not believe in torturing the prisoners or making the conditions inhospitable, but I also do want them to be comfortable. What? Do want them? Wait a minute. But I also don't want them to be very comfortable. And that doesn't make sense. Very comfortable? Let's try especially. But I also don't want them to be especially comfortable, and I want zero fraternization between inmates, whether the jail is minimum or maximum security. I believe a key to rehabilitation of those criminals who actually can be rehabilitated is to keep them away from other criminals. I think this is crucial. Now, since I assume most prisons are not designed this way, it would take time to convert to this type of incarceration system. But I think it is a goal we're shooting for. Okay, that's 14. 15. Every personal transportation vehicle inside a major city must be zero emission within 10 years of this law's enactment. And every business operating inside a major city must be carbon neutral within that city within 20 years of this law's enactment. Whether global warming is an immediate threat or not, it is pretty obvious that there is too much smog in most major cities, over 1 million people. And with an ever-aging population, plus with the elderly being among the most vulnerable to negative effects from smog, it seems logical to try and reduce smog levels as much as is reasonably possible. So I think that a law that prohibits non-zero emission personal transportation vehicles, there's a mouthful, so I think that a law that prohibits non-zero emission, try it again, personal transportation vehicles in major cities, along with all businesses in major cities having to be carbon neutral within those cities, is a logical one, at least until the world's smog situation improves, if it ever does. I think the former is pretty self-explanatory. If you want to drive a personal transportation vehicle into a major city, like a car, van, truck, SUV, motorcycle, etc., I should add etc. to that, it must be zero emission. Yes, electric cars can be expensive, but if someone cannot afford one to replace their internal combustion engine vehicle, they will have to do without and take public transit. Or perhaps car sharing services like Zipcar could be their answer. But to me, I like saying that, Zipcar could be their answer. But to me, it is now avoidable to have smog-belching personal transportation. I gotta have a comma in there somewhere. Zipcar. To have smog-belching personal transportation vehicles in major cities. I'm gonna read that sentence again. But to me, it is now avoidable to have smog-belching personal transportation vehicles in major cities. And what about if you have a car collection or a weekend-only car motorcycle? Zipcar. No, I've got to stop saying that. You will have to store it and drive it outside the city limits. Don't like it? Too bad. As for businesses, I want 20 years after the law would take effect in that country. I want 20 years after. All of them that are housed within the limits of a major city to become carbon neutral inside that city within 20 years. Shorter if reasonably possible. And what I mean is that any business that pollutes within a major city must take steps within that city to offset that pollution so that they become carbon neutral. For instance, they could not pollute within a major city and then take steps outside the city to reach carbon neutrality. They must be carbon neutral within the major city in question. Zipcar. I'll stop saying it. I don't know why I like saying it, I just do. I realize this goes against my free market love. But this is a lower priority for me, and I really think in 2020 that these goals are quite attainable within the time frames allowed for a reasonable cost. Plus, this is a health problem that needs to be addressed. This would not be for bragging rights or feel-good results. This is so human beings, especially ones with breathing troubles like the elderly or people with asthma, can live a decent quality of breathing life within all major cities within a generation. Besides, any major industries that are located within the major cities' limits that could not afford to be carbon neutral will have 20 years to move their facilities just outside the city limits. And all new companies, corporations looking to set up facilities in said major city will just have to look outside the city in question. 16. Maximum, that was 15, this is 16. Maximum political donation per person to $100 US in 2020 dollars per candidate. Corporations, businesses would not be allowed to make campaign contributions. Many political campaigns have gotten completely nuts when it comes to contributions towards them. In the US, major presidential campaigns can run $500 million. Jeez. According to Investopedia, oh hell, there's another link. Just a second. Many political campaigns have gotten completely nuts when it comes to contributions toward them. In the U.S. major presidential campaigns can run $500 million or more. I'll add the or more. According to Investopedia, again, I'll put a link in the description. At the time, quote, at the time, many estimates for the presidential election in 2016 said it would cost at least $3 billion. Some even put the number as high as $10 billion. At $2.4 billion, it fell a bit short of that, but was still a staggering amount. Among the two nominees, Hillary Clinton's campaign spent a total of $768.5 million. Jeez, vastly more than the $440 million Donald Trump's campaign spent, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. This is insane, especially in this day and age when there are an incredible number of news sources that people can access. I could see 40 plus years ago when spending money on a political campaign could be very important. But today, with people bombarded by news from the MSM, mainstream media, the internet, and every tiny move a candidate makes is examined in minute detail, what is even the point of campaigning? I doubt most people fall for campaign commercials nearly as much as they used to. Like that famous little girl in the field when the atomic bomb went off campaign commercial in the 60s that apparently made a huge difference. I think televised debates make far more of a difference to the average voter. Also, with all the media sources, MSM, smaller forums, and online blogs, most people know just about every position the candidates have on just about every conceivable subject. I just don't think campaign spending has that much effect any longer. Yes, it might still affect some people, especially older people, but I think younger people are less impressed with big mass media campaigns than they are with how the candidates fare on the internet. And I think the situation will only increase as time goes by. But even if I am wrong and campaign spending still makes a big difference, then that doubly makes it important for small numbers of wealthy people corporations to not be able to single-handedly affect the outcome of elections. So I want to see a complete ban on any campaign donations from businesses, corporations. And I want to see a $100 limit for each individual to each politician in a political campaign. Even this should provide plenty of funding for the candidates. I mean, in the United States presidential election, if 1 million people each donate $100, that equals $100 million in total. If a candidate cannot get their message out for that amount of money in 2020, then I say they are pretty useless at this skill. By the way, on a side note, I just want to comment on U.S. presidential campaigns. They are completely nuts. Not the amount of money spent, though that is silly, but if people want to be dumb enough to throw their money at staggeringly corrupt politicians, go ahead. No, it's the time these elections take that bugs me. They now take about 2 years from the start of the intense speculation until the actual election. For the 2020 presidential election, the first Democratic nomination debate was in late June 2019. This is insane. Lots of countries take a few months at most to decide whom their candidates and or leaders will be. And they seem to do just fine. Throwing the just in there. Also, with all the intense media microscope on everything the candidates have ever said, highlight ever said or done over such a huge period of time, you end up discouraging lots of great people from ever entering these races for fear of the intense scrutiny on themselves and their families. The slightest mistake they or a loved one ever made, and they get ripped apart for it. No wonder politicians are so awful. All the truly great people who might run don't have the stomach for it. And that leaves jerks and corrupt people who can live with the scrutiny to do their lust for power ritual. Good people make mistakes. That is a fact. People should not be condemned for medium, small mistakes. Let's change that to errors in judgment. Errors in judgment. And people learn from their mistakes far more than from their successes. So I want a candidate who made mistakes and learned from them, rather than one who did nothing controversial or special just so he could get elected and learn nothing. Does that make sense? I want a candidate who made mistakes and learned from them, rather than one who did nothing controversial or special just so he could get elected, but who had learned nothing along the way. I like that better. But whom had learned virtually nothing along the way. And frankly, I don't give a crap what politicians do in their spare time. If they're snorting coke off of the belly of a prostitute every night, that's fine with me. And it is. So long as they are not high when it's time to work the next morning. Though if you are a head of state, I would prefer you left the coke snorting until after you are the leader, thanks. They could be having an intense sexual affair with a table lamp. They could stand on their head for 4 hours every night. I don't give an excrement, just so long as they are sane and are doing a good job running whatever they are politically running. That is all I really care about. And that is all that should matter to most people. They are trying to run your geographical area, not become your daddy. There is no reason whatsoever why the U.S. I don't like that sentence. Nah, it's okay, I can live with it. There is no reason whatsoever why the U.S. Democratic Republican nomination processes cannot take 3 months tops, while the presidential campaign also lasts 3 months tops. None. There is no reason whatsoever why the U.S. Democratic Republican nomination processes cannot last 3 months tops, while the presidential campaign also lasts 3 months tops. None. This is not 1880 before the internet, TV, or radio, and when candidates had to literally travel almost everywhere to get their messages out to voters. And I defy anyone to factually prove using unbiased sources to me that to have a campaign run in this manner, the 3 months tops one, I'm going to change that, to have a campaign run of 3 months in duration would not allow the best candidate to win in the end. Elections should be about finding the best person for the job, and to accept that some of the greatest people for running a country will almost certainly have a few political warts, not which slimeball is the best at hiding his skeletons where no one can see them. Anyway, once again, I would like to see laws enacted that limit the amount of money a person can contribute to a political campaign to $100 US dollars in 2020 dollars. And I would like to see a complete ban on any campaign contributions at all from businesses or corporations to any political candidates. Not that this will stop corporations influencing candidates anyway. They could, instead of giving them money, promise the candidate some cushy position on their board of directors when they retire in return for political favors. But at least it would make it much more difficult for corporations to directly influence elections. Okay, that was 16, this is 17. Limit the maximum any person may have in any one country to $10 billion in 2020 US dollars. I struggle with this one. As a free market guy, I'm for people making as much as they legally can. However, things have changed. With the central banks of the world since 2007, 2008, deliberately manipulating the stock markets to make them go skywards, along with the fact that the vast majority of the equity stock markets are owned by the wealthy. This has definitely skewed the market towards the rich, mega rich, for well over a decade, and is still going on. The wealthy have benefited incredibly from a staggeringly biased system towards them from a staggeringly biased system towards them the wealthy have benefited incredibly from a staggeringly biased system towards them from government central banks. I'll put a comma in there somewhere. The bottom line in these wealthy people have largely gotten far wealthier due to a highly tilted playing field. You should put a comma in there. I'm not big on commas. Highly tilted playing. Yeah. And with the wealthiest people in the world topping over 100 billion US in total wealth, things are going too far. I mean, these ultra-rich, wealthy people are probably making more each year than the bottom 40-plus GDP countries each do per year. Sorry, mega wealthy people, but that is just too much influence concentrated within too few unelected people. Now, I do not believe in wealth confiscation. That just does not sit right with me. But I'm for limiting how much wealth any one person may have in any one country to $10 billion, US dollars in 2020 dollars. What that means is the total net worth of any single person within one country must total less than $10 billion. If it is more than that, the person in question has 1 year to get it under $10 billion. If they fail to do this, the tax services of that particular country may take whatever assets from that person within that country they wish to drop that person's wealth down to 10 million, not 10 million. Boy, that's a lot. 10 billion in that country. These monies, assets will then be given to the 5 official charities and any percentages of the wealthy person's choice that are primarily located in the country in question. The onus on making sure a person is under this limit would be up to the person, him or herself. Of course, a government agency could audit that person whenever they wish. And if that person were found to be over the limit, any costs incurred by that audit, up to a certain amount, would be deducted from the person's total wealth in that country. I originally was going to go with 1 billion, but I thought that could be a little too much to ask, and it might start to change the way some major corporations are run. Even giving too much incentive for certain corporations to offshore their facilities to avoid their larger shareholders' owners going over the maximum limit. It should be said, however, that I am open to a bit of flexibility on this position of mine, though not tons. But one thing is necessary, in my opinion. There must be some way put in place, assuming disgusting central banks and their blatant attempts to help their wealthy buddies and themselves continues, there must be some way put in place to slow down, To slow down the very concerning wealth... I'm going to put that in parentheses, brackets. No, it's not parentheses. What? There must be some way put in place, parentheses, assuming disgusting central banks and their blatant attempts to help their wealthy buddies and themselves continues, another parentheses, to slow down the very concerning wealth gap that is going on, and especially to stop too few ultra-wealthy people gaining too much power without ever having been elected to office or having any check on their exploding power and influence. Excuse me. However, I also do not want this to turn into an envy session where the ultra-rich are punished strictly because the masses are envious, resentful of the immense wealth the former have while the latter enjoyed little none. I'm not sure where the line of people having too much wealth power is, but for now, this is the best way I can think of to even begin to curtail it in a reasonably fair manner. Though the best way of all would be to destroy every central bank in the world and force governments to post balanced budgets. This would go a long way to addressing the wealth and inequality gap growth that is happening in the world these days. The masses need to understand once and for all that governments, especially those run by men, and central banks, all of them, do not care about the masses. They don't. Governments just care about your votes, and most people are easy to con. And central banks do not care in the slightest about the masses. They live in their ivory towers, and the vast majority of them could not relate to the masses or hardworking normal people if their lives depended on it. Governments, and especially central banks, are friends of the rich, literally. If the masses ever want a chance at real power again, governments must be forced out of the economy, and central banks must be destroyed altogether. (18) All children under 14 and convicted felons must wear a locating device, similar to a Fitbit smartwatch. I realize this is potentially an extremely controversial topic. I know I am wary enough about government monitoring of citizens. But at the same time, something needs to be done to try and curtail the ridiculous amount of child abuse and sexual attacks that still go on around the world. And now we have the technology to at least put a dent on the total number of people suffering from these horrible crimes. I am open to suggestions on this, but this was the best idea that I could come up with that could make a relatively immediate difference. So I propose that all people under 14 and all people with criminal records must, by law, wear personal tracking devices. Whether it would be an implanted device or one they would wear on their wrists, I think it is time to try this idea. So, after a certain age, say 6 months to 2 years of age, a child would be fitted with a watch-like device that would monitor both their vital signs and their location. Obviously, it would have to be changed as the child grew, at least the band if it's a watch-like device. My understanding is that implanted devices have too many limitations at this time to be the best answer for this. But I am miles from an expert on that, and if it turns out that would be the best solution, I am all for it. But let us assume that the watch-like device is the best option. In this case, a child would wear this device continually until they turn 14. The device would have to have some sort of removable battery so the device can be recharged without removing it from the child's wrist. And the device would obviously have to be waterproof up to a certain point. As well, comfort would of course have to be a prime requirement. This device would be monitored by some government or possibly a private agency hired by the government. They would have continuous knowledge of all the children's vital signs and location. Of all the children. As far as the vital signs are concerned, the agency would get an alert from the device when the device detects some alarming numbers being registered, like a dangerous pulse rate, heart rate. This agency would then contact the parents of the child, and if no satisfactory response is received within a specified time period, this agency would then contact emergency services to respond to the situation. And these services could use the locating device to go where the child is quickly. As far as security is concerned, if the watch were removed from the child's wrist or stopped working properly, a different alarm would sound at the monitoring agency. Again, they would immediately try and contact the parents. If they're not able to confirm the safety of the child, perhaps they could activate an alarm on the device and immediately notify the emergency services that perhaps a kidnapping was in progress. Additionally, as soon as the device is not in contact with its owner, this alarm could immediately sound on the device. I think I said that already. I did. As for people with criminal records, the monitoring would be far more indirect, subtle. There would really be only 2 times the device would alert the agency authorities. One would be if the vital signs had stopped, yet the device was still attached to the wrist, and perhaps if the vital signs are in dangerous territory as well. In this case, the emergency authorities would be alerted. The other time would be if the device stopped working, was removed from the owner's wrist for any period of time. Perhaps an alarm on the device would go off and or the authorities would be instantly notified. The owner of the device would be immediately contacted and questioned accordingly. The other way the device could be used would be to determine if the owner was in the vicinity of a crime that had been convicted. This would be done through a court order to examine the device owner's whereabouts during a certain period of time. A Fitbit device has been used on several occasions to help prove the innocence and or guilt of certain parties in serious crimes so far. This is how I picture this device being utilized as well. The person with the criminal record would be required to wear the device for as long as he has a criminal record, say until he was pardoned. However, if his crime was violent, he might be forced to wear the device for the rest of his life, even if he is pardoned. Or maybe he would be forced to wear the device for a set number of years after he was pardoned. I'm flexible on this. I feel strongly that even if people do not want to have children wear such devices, this law should be implemented for convicted criminals, especially violent ones. I cannot remember how many times I've heard that people convicted of sexual crimes ended up going to jail, getting out, and then committing further sexual crimes. This is utterly ridiculous, and everything reasonable must be utilized to stop this from occurring. Okay, that was 18. This is 19. Torture and capital punishment are illegal under all circumstances. This to me is another no-brainer. Torture and capital punishment are just wrong. Torture is for bullies and the weak. If the only way a country can survive is by torturing people, then I literally hope the country does not survive. It is just barbaric and the country is not worth it in my mind. However, let's say there was a captured terrorist who said he had an atomic bomb in a city and it was going to detonate in 24 hours. And let's say that he will not tell where the bomb is under questioning. Now, in that case, I can understand why the authorities would torture him to try and stop the bomb exploding, assuming there even is a bomb. But even in that case, whomever ordered the torturing, plus whomever carried it out, must be punished under the law, with no extenuating circumstances in sentencing. Torture is torture, and it must always be illegal and punished, even if it saves lives. You have to do that, or then you can start justifying torture for less and less. First, it's the atom bomb terrorist. Then it's the terrorist with a bomb in a building. Then it's a friend of the terrorist with a bomb in a building. Then it's the friend of a guy who might be a child molester. Then it can just go on and on. No, torture must always be illegal, and it must always be punished harshly. Capital punishment. Almost everyone who is for this that I have known were either weak, was either weak, a bully, and or stupid. It's revenge, pure and simple. And revenge is for saps. Besides, the fact is that in America, it is actually far more expensive to execute a prisoner than to incarcerate him for life. So the financial benefit theory is out the window. And unless he admits to the crime, you can never be 100% certain that he did what he is accused of. And unless he admits to the crime, you can never be certain, 100% certain, that the criminal in question actually did what he's being executed for. And finally, it is just immoral and wrong. I do not believe for 1 second that any human is wise enough to decide what is a just punishment, let alone if executing someone is fair. Besides, it's a horrible deterrent. If it is such a fantastic deterrent, then why do people in U.S. states with capital punishment still keep murdering people horribly? That proves 100% it is no deterrent. Even if deterring someone is not the reason, then what is left? Protecting the public, eye for an eye, and simple revenge. And or simple revenge. Protecting the public. This is the only one that holds even the tiniest merit to me, and even that is not much. Obviously, anyone who would have been executed for a crime will be incarcerated for life without parole if there was no death penalty. But there is a chance they could escape one day, though the odds of that are pretty extreme. However, if they did, how long could they possibly be at large? A few days, a week, huddled in a bush or an old cabin he found? He is not likely to start murdering again. He is too busy hiding. And even so, that is still not reason enough to kill the guy. It's just wrong, period. Eye for an eye. I'm not religious in the slightest, and I don't give a poop about that reason. I realize others do give a poop about it. I just don't care much. I am not basing my actions on a bunch of words written by some dude several millennia ago that is supposed to be the word of some god that their followers have not one shred of proof ever even existed. Scientific proof, let alone is a god. I don't do the leap of faith silliness. You want to? Fine. Just keep it to yourself and don't try and ram it down everyone else's throats, please. Revenge. Again, revenge is for the weekend or the stupid. My brother burned himself to death. Now, I loved him very much, and I'm sorry he is gone. Why am I telling you this? Because A, he was burned beyond recognition, and B, we could not find his dental records, so we do not actually know it is him. Also, the police were not 100% sure that it was not a murder. Well, let's say they called me today and said it was a murder, and they caught the guy that did it. That did it? Who did it? I caught the guy who did it. Yeah, who I think is better. I still would not want him put to death if I had a choice. Killing him won't bring my brother back. And I assume anyone who commits a grisly enough murder to warrant the death penalty is sick and sane anyway. Now, I would not, and I see no point in executing insane people. Would I want him incarcerated for life? Yep. Would I like to beat the shit out of him, even though he is probably nuts? Probably. Hey, I never said I was a saint. But have him killed? That holds no interest for me whatsoever. In fact, I would probably try and stop them doing it. Torture and capital punishment are for the weak, period. And they should be outlawed, and both should be outlawed under all circumstances. Okay, that's 19. And now 20. Ooh, this is a touchy one. Abortions. It's not me reading it, that's just me saying it. Number 20. Abortions are illegal after the fetus has attained sentience. This is another touchy subject that no matter how great a job I do of convincing people, some people simply will not agree with me. Their minds are 100% shut on the subject. So instead of wasting both our times with me trying, if you are one of those people, I will just say that I believe that any sentient being that is deliberately killed, that is murder, person slaughter, my term for manslaughter. It matters not at all whether they are inside or outside of a woman's womb. It's still murder / person slaughter to me. Now, what about the notion of, well, it's my body and my choice? I think I might take the murder part out. I'll just call it person slaughter. Now, what about the notion of, well, it's my body and my choice? That is a load of crap to me. The fetus is attached to your body. It is not part of your body. It is a living being that is gestating from you inside your body. It is not part of your body, not in my book. It is not a body part. It is a person. The most premature baby to be born. The most premature baby to be born and survive was at 21 weeks, 3 days that I could find. So after that time, you can no longer rightfully argue that the child, how do I phrase that? The most premature baby to be born and survive was at 21 weeks, 3 days that I could find. So if your child fetus is past 21 weeks, 3 days, you can no longer rightfully argue that the child is part of you, as he or she no longer may need you to survive any longer. So that little girl named Lila, whom was born after 21 weeks and 3 days, has proven to me with 100% certainty that it should never be legal to kill a child before 21 weeks and 3 days. And yes, I say that a lot, not that, but 21 weeks, 3 days. And yes, if someone is ever born and survives at, say, 21 weeks even, then that would be the new minimum standard to me. Now, what about exceptions? Obviously, if the mother's life is in danger, that is an exception. Or if the child will have huge birth defects, that could be an exception. Though I would leave those two to doctors to decide, as I cannot begin to determine when either situation warrants an exception. So other than the two exceptions above, no mother should legally be able to abort her pregnancy after 21 weeks and 3 days. Additionally, if scientists determine that a fetus attains sentience at a lower term, if scientists en masse determine that a fetus attains sentience at a lower term than 21 weeks, 3 days, then that could be the limit. I have read some scientists say that 24 weeks is the date. Now, the fact that children have been born and survived before 20 weeks throws that out the window. Throws that right out the window. So for me, barring one of the two exceptions listed above, no abortion should be legal before 21 weeks, 3 days. By the way, on a personal note, if I was married to someone who was pregnant and whom had been for over 22 weeks, certainly over 24 weeks, and the doctor said she had a choice: have the child through cesarean section, but the mother will almost certainly die, or abort the child who appears healthy and the mother will almost certainly live. If she chose the latter, to end the pregnancy and save herself, I cannot say for certain, as I've never been in that situation. But I'm pretty sure that I would not want to be with that woman any longer. I just think I could not respect a woman who chose themselves over their own child, assuming it was as clear-cut as the above scenario. I assume real-life scenarios like this are rarely that clear-cut. However, I assume real-life situations like that are rarely that clear-cut. I'm not saying the woman should be arrested or condemned in any way. I just simply do not think I could respect her any longer, certainly not enough to want to stay married to her. Perhaps her and I could still be friends. I do not know. But that is just me. And what about the reverse? What about those who say that all abortion should be illegal? Well, long ago I used to think as you do, but not any longer, for two reasons. One, a child who is not sentient will have no knowledge of being aborted. Got to turn that around. Will have no knowledge of being aborted, and a fetus without brain activity cannot be sentient. Not possible. You cannot feel something if you have no functioning brain, so it would not be cruel to the child. Yes, there is that soul thing, but again, I do not really believe in that stuff. I'm not positive about life after death. In fact, if pressed, I would guess there probably is some form of life after death. I am basing this mostly on people... Why do I have this? I am basing this mostly on people who died and then came back and what they experienced during that death period. And yes, I have heard the theory that the brain, when it is dying, might produce some sort of a dream state. But I'm not buying that as the explanation for post-death experiences, post-death experiences for two reasons. I'm going to change that to I have often heard the people that die and are revived say that they heard the voice of someone whom they knew, but whom had died already, was calling them. Now, why the heck would a dying brain do that for so many people? That makes no sense at all. I could see a dying brain giving a sensation of floating or something, but a dead loved one calling them? That makes zip sense to me. It's too specific. I'm going to add that. It's too specific. B, I saw this instance where this child apparently died and was revived. When she was asked to draw what she saw when she was dead, she drew everyone in the room where she was, plus one other. A person with some sort of crash cart, a device to revive people, that I recall. Though the funny thing is that she had never seen that person or device before, and the person device entered the room after she died and left the room before she was revived. how could she, well, before she regained consciousness. I think that's regained consciousness. She could have, how could she have drawn them if she had never seen them before, unless she had actually been looking down at them whilst she was dead? Now, I realize that this is just one instance, and maybe it was fabricated to some extent. But all of the instances of what people described after they died has partially convinced me that there is some form of life after death, at least for 20 minutes or so after you die. After that, no idea. So all this leads me to believe that to believe that if you are aborted before you are sentient, and certainly if you never had brain activity, that your soul never had a chance, and it seems pretty cruel that you lose a chance at life because someone else aborted you. Huh? What is that? Oh, right. So all this leads me to believe that if you are aborted before you were sentient, and certainly if you never had brain activity, that your soul never had a chance, and it seems pretty cruel that you lose a chance at life because someone else aborted you. This doesn't make sense. Okay, I think I fixed it. So all this leads me to believe that if you are aborted before you are sentient, and certainly if you never had brain activity, that your soul never had a chance, and it seems pretty cruel that you lose a chance at life because someone else aborted you. Meaning, I doubt the universe is so cruel that you get a few weeks of being a fetus, but if you get aborted, that is it. No more human life for you. No soup for you. Human life for you. Also, if you never had brain activity, you never knew of it anyway. You were not even started yet. Yeah, it can get pretty convoluted. Yeah. And the second reason I don't think abortions before sentience, or certainly before brain activity, should be illegal, though I am far from thrilled about abortions between brain activity beginning and 20 plus weeks. At about 11 weeks, I think, is when brain activity starts. Fact is, I'm not thrilled with abortions at all. I hate them all. But one must be realistic, which brings me to my second reason. The fact is, I'm not thrilled with abortions in the slightest. I hate them all. But one must be realistic, which brings me to my second reason. I thought this was the second reason. I do not think that a child being forced to be born to a mother family that does not want that child is anything but cruel. That child is probably in for a miserable life. Not for certain, but probably. And please save the adoption option. I have met enough kids whose adopted parents absolutely suck to completely dispel the old notion that adopted parents must be great parents because they're just so grateful that they have a child at all. These parents I heard about were miles from even decent. Sure, many adopted parents can be great, but they can also suck, big time. So that is no guarantee of the child's happiness either. Frankly, I have known several people who were raised in lousy circumstances who said they wish they had never been born. So being born at all costs is not a great option. If the mother does not want the child, and the child is for certain not sentient, or even better, has no brain activity yet, I do not think the law should force her to have the child. It has nothing whatsoever to do with her rights. I could care less what she wants in this situation. I'm strictly thinking of the fetus child that could end up being born into a rotten situation and have a life of relative misery. And then that unhappy child could grow up and they could then possibly have children of their own and then give them a life of relative misery, and on and on. No, if a mother wants to abort her fetus before it is sentient, especially before there's brain activity, I reluctantly think she should be allowed to do just that. Well, those are the 20 laws, rules, policies I would like to see the 2020, the 2020 party, or whatever it ends up being called, adopt. By the way, although they are in general order of preference, big 6, medium 6, small 8, they are not in order of preference within each of the three groupings. In other words, number 18 is not necessarily more important to me than number 19. These are just the order that I wrote about them. In addition to these 20 laws, rules, policies that I would like to see enacted, whether in the 2020 party or not, I would also like to see the United Nations replaced with a different organization. I call it, for lack of a better name, UN 2.0. Okay, that's the end of this part. And the next part I'll discuss the UN 2.0 and I'll wrap it up. Thank you for listening and have a good day.